Waiters, waitresses, what was the worst first date you have witnessed at your restaurant? Waiting tables at a fairly high-end place. My recently divorced brother's ex-wife came in with her new rich lawyer boyfriend. She knew I worked there. Lawyer boy's credit card was declined and she had to pick up the tab. I guess these kids probably met on Tinder or something, because after the guy started going off about his political views, the girl was super not into it. She asked me to close her out while he was in the bathroom so she could slink out. Not sure what they were talking about. I used to work at a Waffle House in college. This kid, maybe 17-18, took a girl to a Waffle House and non-stop talked about cars the entire time. The boredom on her face was palpable. I know people think it was a low point for Pixar, but I personally believe there's a lot of good stuff in the first movie. I used to work at Steakhouse in Shake throughout college. There was a whole week that a man came in and got a table for two, then waited hours before getting up and leaving. By about day 5 she finally showed up, ordered a shake and left. He wanted to give her the steak. She only wanted a shake. Oh man. I don't know how bad it is relatively speaking, and I don't know if it was a first date. But this guy was complaining that his date had taken too long to get ready. She had clearly put a lot of effort into her appearance. He asked me, like, how long do you think a person should take to get ready? How long do you take to get ready? It was so awkward. I don't even think I was their server. He'd just roped me in. Damn. He's literally complaining about someone putting time and effort into looking nice for him. Sounds like a real prick. When I was a waitress years ago, I waited on a table that was a very obvious, awkward first date. They barely spoke the entire time and I got called over because the guy accidentally knocked over his water glass and spilled it all over the table and all over his date's lap. When I gave them the bill, he gave me his credit card, which got declined, so she had to pay. Felt so bad for the kid. We had a lady on a first date blind date come in last week and she has her table booked and she was a little bit early. 3 hours later she was still sat at the bar waiting. The bloke had stood her up and it had really upset her. To make matters worse, he had phoned in and I answered the phone. He said that he had arrived but had seen what she looked like and that she wasn't his type but couldn't face her to tell her. So could we tell her? You can bet your ass I didn't tell her that. I just pulled my manager to one side and filled her in on what the man had said and we both agreed that was heartless, so we said nothing to her. I do feel bad. Not a waiter, but was at a faux place and it was the table next to me. In summary, the guy tried to book 15 more dates, literally. He wanted every Saturday until her booked vacation, and the girl said we'll see. My understanding of we'll see is a no in this case. But who knows? He proceeded to interrogate the girl in the most awkward way. Like he wants to get to the bottom of it. One example was that he asked her if she likes the soup. She said yes. And then he asked her about why she liked the soup. And then why she liked the flavorfulness of the soup. And why she likes savory things. At one point she just said, "It's just a personal preference." He then said, "Why do you have such personal preference?" Probably a Redditor. Every dating advice thread on here has be sure to ask questions. As a barista, I once saw a regular meet his first ever same-sex date. This guy was in his 40s and had recently come out. But we all were rooting for him, despite his Marvet registered sign. Turns out the guy he'd asked out was the only other gay guy he remembered from high school. Cute that he looked the guy up. Right? Well, it turns out the other guy was only so memorable because he had spent the last 20 or so years in prison for murdering his high school bully. The date seemed to go well, actually. But once we heard the story we were all a little weirded out by it. I've had one date at my bar which seemed to be alright. Nothing special. The lady arrived first, so I opened a tab in her name. We don't take your credit card or ID or anything when you open a tab. We just need your name. Netherlands here. They seemed to get along and including some snack their bill came to about €50. They decide to call it a night and she asks for the bill. Now my personal rule is that I'll put the bill in front of whoever asks for it. I do not care if you are male or female, young or old, drunk or sober. Whoever asks for the bill gets it. So she asked for it. I put it in front of her. She look at the bill like it's covered in herpes and topped with AIDS and tells me, "You don't give it to me. He is a man. He is paying." He responded by saying, "Forget what we just talked about. Date is over. I'm going home." And he walked out. A bit late to the game. And I didn't get to see it. My mom was on the younger side when she had me. And when she went into labor, all of the family happened to not be around. Panicked. She called her friend to take her to the hospital. Her friend could, but she was going on a date. So she had to take her on the way. She does now. And has for a long time realized how f***ed up this was. So this friend and her date, a first date, take my mother to the hospital. The guy was freaked. My mom was in labor in this chick's backseat. Just on their way to get sushi. They still went out on that date. I would love to hear from that server. They walked into the country buffet that I worked at in high school on a Tuesday night. He was trying to pull off the classic 80s bad boy thing. Leather jacket. Smoking, you could still smoke in most restaurants back then. And insisting on making her do everything he wanted. Told her what to eat, what not to eat because it would give her gas. Wouldn't let her talk. Wouldn't let her get up from the table without him. If he left, he had her come too. Except for when he went to the restroom. She handed the waiter a $5 and asked if she could use the phone to call for a ride. She went across the street and waited while the guy pitched a fit. Sadly, he was horrible at the bad boy thing. So I have always wondered if she was into some kind of fetish that he just wasn't into. Sorry, but bad boy and a country buffet don't seem to mix very well. I'm not sure if it was a first date, but I was waitressing in the dining room of a sports bar. The couple I was waiting on was arguing quite a bit and I was avoiding their table as much as possible. The woman gets up to go to the bathroom and I decide to take the opportunity to go check on their drinks. While I'm refilling the man's water, he goes, "When the food is ready, will you put mine in a to-go box and bring me my check?" When their food was finally ready, I did exactly what he asked and awkwardly brought him his boxed up food, his check, and her plated food. She just looked at my hands, looked at him and said, "Are you serious?" Not sure if it was a first date, but I wouldn't assume this guy could get a second. He put a $5 tip in one hand and a 20 in the other, and though I first resisted, he insisted that I choose a hand for my tip. It was uncomfortable for me and the girl. When I got the 5, I really expected him to say that he was kidding and give me the 20. It was so rude. But he didn't. Such a dick move. I was working at an Applebee's and this guy was waiting for his date and kept asking for ice. Oh man, I was working at Applebee's one time and this guy had been waiting an hour. So I sat down with him and acted like we were old buddies and said, "You coming?" He said no. I said, "Let's act like you're my uncle and you were just waiting on me to give me a ride." I said pretty loudly, "Hey, thanks for waiting. I don't need a ride, Uncle Joe. I'll walk you to the door, thanks for waiting." Not wait staff but. Close bracket. One time we saw a friend on a first date. So we sent our then 3-year-old son over to bang on the window and yell, "Mom, I'm cold. Can I come inside?" The date was a good sport about the whole thing. It was at my parents' place and I wasn't working at the time. But my brother was and he relayed all the details in f***ing brain searing detail. An elderly couple came in and ordered food. The lady in question was crabby and pissed off and wasn't all that happy. The gentleman friend of hers was trying to make things go better. Turned out, they weren't married. They lived in a local retirement home and were out on a date. The man proceeds to stand up to use the facilities. Only he was too late and a lump of shit rolled out his trouser leg. Obviously distressed and embarrassed. His lady friend did the right thing by announcing very loudly, "Oh Christ. You've shit yourself again." My brother had to clean it up. He wasn't impressed. I was serving a table who met through Tinder. Shocker, the young lady seemed enthusiastic about it. Her obviously shy Asian date, not so much. He tried to order for them both, but that failed as she spoke over him to order for them instead. Apparently he didn't realize a date meant you had to actually speak. So she spent the rest of the night flagging me down and proceeded to flirt with me the entire date. When she left to the restroom, he then asked me what he was doing wrong. Did you give him any advice? I don't know what happened at the table, but he asked me out when he was paying for their food. I declined. Lol. Me. Server at Morton's the steakhouse. Her. Super vegan. Him. Had no f-king clue. And or didn't f-king care. When the guy gave me his card, it got declined. So the girl kind of giggled and gave me her card. It was also declined. Not waiter waitress, but was working as a to-go cashier. During my downtime, I went and checked out the packed dining room, and I noticed a teenage couple come in and sit down. Roughly 5-10 minutes later, 2 other teen girls approached the table and started talking to the guy. They were clearly friends of his. The conversation went on and on and on, and on and on. And the girl sitting across from him pulled out her phone because the 2 girls were completely monopolizing the conversation. I felt bad for her. After a few more minutes, she got up and went to the bathroom. The 2 girls stood there for an additional 10 minutes before leaving. And the guy's date looked really disheartened. I felt so bad for her. Edit. I went on a date with a guy that I met in a laundromat. He invited me to his company Christmas party. He picked me up and then about 1-2 miles from the restaurant his car died. I had to help him push it. When we get to the party, he finds out it's a cash bar and has no money. So, yeah. I got to push a car on a cold dark night in high heels. And then I got to pay for drinks. The fact that you stuck with this is impressive to me. I was at a local coffee shop doing some writing one night and a guy comes in, scopes the place out, then makes a beeline over to me. Megan? He asks hopefully. I shake my head and reply that I'm not Megan. A girl at the table across from me raises her hand and says I'm Megan. He looks at her, looks back at me, looks at her again, and says, "Oh." Just absolutely deadpan with the delivery. Then he proceeds to sit to the left of her instead of across from her, which also happens to be facing me. And she clearly realizes this. I sat there uncomfortably as he nodded at her but kept his eyes wandering over to me. And finally, after hearing some painfully stilted conversation, I got up and left. I felt so awful for her. Oh. I have something related. Buddy of mine is going on a blind date. I happen to be visiting, hanging out with him at his place that weekend. He's too awkward to mention, I'm too dumb to pick up on the fact that he's going on a blind date. I guess I figured that sort of thing wouldn't be planned on a weekend I was staying over at his place. So I basically invite myself onto my friend's blind date. Most awkward evening ever. For everyone. I was on a horrible first date with a girl I met off Match or OKC, and this was like 15+ years ago when online dating was less than common, who was 6 shorter, which as someone super tall is kind of a deal breaker for me. 50 pounds heavier and a whole lot more racist than her profile indicated. While my date was in the bathroom, I had the waitress box up my date's food and get my check, and when she brought it to me it had a note that said something like "I'm sorry for you, but this has been really fun to watch. I get off work at 10. Call me." And had her number. I paid the bill and left a big tip and left before my date got back and called the waitress from the parking lot and went on a date with her and ended up dating her for like 4 months. She never let me live it down how bad it was and how much her coworkers were laughing at us. I used to work many moons ago at a chain named for a specific color crustacean. Anyway, the worst I saw wasn't even that bad. It was, however, a meetup for sex in exchange for money. The girl comes and arrives early. She orders a drink and an appetizer. Appetizer to come out later. Cool. He arrives and they haggle over her price. Now, I've never bought a working lady, but she was an extremely attractive lady. Worth an hourly rate. Sugar baby. Expensive hooker type. They settled on 1,200. Paid. Tipped well and left. I'm all for the hustle. I've sold a few good times myself, but it was horrid because she was shameless and he was loud. People complained. Everybody heard and it just embarrassed me to see it. They left to do the deed but not before he gave her half, which he tipped me out of. The waitstaff taking pity on the person who's been stood up. Don't always fall for it. Guy I lived with was not a friend. In uni used to book a table for two. Always asking for the most romantic table. It's for a first date. He'd show up looking smart. Sometimes with flowers if he could get them cheap from the garage at the end of the day. Then he'd sit there looking sadder and sadder. Eventually order something just for himself. He got a lot of free meals. Most of the time they calmed him at least a drink or a starter. Some. He would go back to a month later and pull the same stunt. And they'd fall for it again. He was just really unlucky in love. The CNT. Knew a girl who would come in with a new dude every week just for free food. Oh no, it's too late and this will get buried. But this is a good one. I worked at a Mexican restaurant a few years ago and I remember seeing this couple come in. They seemed like a new couple. I didn't see hand holding or anything. And the guy seemed shy. Overall it looked like a textbook first date. 20 minutes or so later this dude rushed in. Sees the couple. Yells what the FCK. Punches the guy in the F-king face. Flips the table. And leaves. Turns out the chick was cheating on the guy with this other guy. I felt really bad. But I swear we watched the security footage like 100 times. I'll never understand why the cheated on guy takes their anger out on the other guy. The dude probably didn't know she was married or whatever. Should take it out on the cheating hoe. I know a bar with a lot of beds in one room. Nothing all. You can just lounge around and drink beer in a big 4-poster bed. Pretty sweet. Was in there with my girlfriend and our friend and a first date was going badly in one of the other beds. Imagine having a bad first date. And multiply the awkward by 1,000,000 because you're failing to get laid with someone you're already in a bed with. Drunk. We couldn't talk much on our bed because we were all so distracted watching this train wreck going on nearby and trying not to make it obvious that they were our entertainment. Less details about how you guys were reacting and more details on what actually happened with the date on the other bed. Not restaurant staff, but I was on a first date at a beer garden and had the pleasure of sitting near another couple of their first date. He looked pissed. Staring everywhere but at her and he looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there. At one point I heard her say, "I have two younger sisters. 17 and 23. Angry silence because you asked. Continued angry silence. Of course. If they had overheard my first date they would have heard him bemoan his very attractive second wife, for whom he left his first wife, because she was so mean to him. Let me tell you how bad I feel for ya bud. I worked at Outback and this guy was on a date where it was apparent he was trying to impress. He called me over and asked how many ribs came with the prime rib. Not wanting to embarrass him, I redirected him to the ribs on the barbie. But he didn't get the hint. So I said 0 ribs came with the prime rib because it's a steak and gave his date the forget this dumbest look before walking off into the sunset kitchen. Well then till she downed a bottle and a half of wine while she waited for the guy to show up. Once he showed up he ended up being about 20 years over her age and a little overweight. He then proceeded to try and get down her pants while kids were around. Had to kick them out. Oh, and did I mention he tipped $2?